Go ahead and state your name and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Josh Swider from Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs, founder and CEO.
Perfect. All right, here we go. Hey everybody, I'm Jason with Isn't Life Curious and curious about cannabis. And today we are continuing our journey of trying to understand what in the world is going on with cannabis quality and the cannabis industry. In some of the more recent episodes that I've recorded, I've been talking about some issues around cannabis fraud, cannabis testing. I recently gave a talk at ACS about issues around quality in the cannabis industry and our kind of urgent need to think about how we're setting up regulations, incentive structures, and all of these sort of things that are driving a lot of lab shopping and all that sort of stuff. Today, I'm really excited to finally be sitting down with Josh Swider. We actually came across each other in April at the Emerald Conference and got to meet each other briefly in person there. I've followed Josh's work for years. We've both been in the cannabis testing space essentially since it kind of started. And I know from my experience, and I'll let Josh speak to this too, but Josh has been speaking about the issue of lab shopping and lab fraud and quality in the industry, at least as far back publicly that I could find, like 2019, 2020 or so, probably further back than that. And so it's great. We finally get to sit down and talk about this issue and kind of unpack it for listeners, kind of starting at sort of high level, and we'll dive deeper. But for those that don't know, you run the lab Infinite Cal out of California, and you've also got a location in Michigan now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And been operating since around 2016 or so.
Yeah.
And some of you may have come across some of Josh's work recently because some of the data and kind of side work that Josh has been doing through the lab has been covered by several journalists that have been trying to understand product label variations, contaminants in cannabis, and that sort of thing. So with that long spiel, I'm excited. But Josh, thank you so much for being willing to take the time to come on the podcast today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. And
Absolutely.
there's a lot to unpack always in all that you said right there.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's start kind of, as is typical, we'll kind of go back to when you started. So tell listeners just a little bit about your background and what drew you into the cannabis testing space those years ago.
Yeah. So I mean, I've been around the cannabis plant always my whole life and been around it and kind of came into the testing industry after going back to college and getting a bachelor of science in chemistry, physics, biology, master's in analytical chemistry, and a JDP in analytical chemistry, specialized in developing ionization sources for mass spectrometers. It's a lot of stuff that no one probably understands, but very few of us. A hardware mass spec guy. But I love analytical chemistry. I mean, that's kind of my passion for this industry, is combining the two passions that I had and seeing something out there that needed a need for the analytical industry. So I started the lab with a co-founder of mine, David Morelius, who was is also a chemist, not was, is also a chemist. He's an organic chemist, and I'm the analytical chemist. And we kind of started this in this industry because of the real need for quality testing. A new emergence industry is you saw it, and I remember people would call me and just be like, "I can't believe you're just throwing away degrees and a decade of education to go into cannabis." I'm like, there's something here, and there's science that needs to be done. I mean, I'm going to take my step and do the analytical chemistry part of it because I think that's what I'm good at and what I'm here to do, and to make sure that there's safe product on the shelf. So what we ended up doing was starting a Infinite Chemical Analysis Labs out of San Diego, California. I mean, we really started with two guys knocking on doors at green crosses, asking people to test a flower to check how safe it is. It was interesting, to say the least. And I mean, over the years, we've kind of grown a few different moves in San Diego, and now we're at a 16,000 square foot facility in San Diego. I have another 16,000 square foot that does non-cannabis. And then I have another 10,000 square foot that does cannabis and hemp in Michigan as well. I've been in Michigan since I think 2018, 2019. I can't remember whenever it was legalized. We've been in California pre-regulation. I mean, we've been screaming about regulation, how to maybe improve them for years. A lot of this just goes back to the passion of cannabis and having it come out to the public, you know. And
Yeah.
my biggest fear is it gets torn away because of people not doing it correctly. Let it be labs, let it be producers,
Hmm.
or we do something that we didn't know. So sometimes the first time you put out a new compound or a new type way to ingest something, we don't screen it appropriately, and then the adverse effects can be pointing back at it. And it wasn't actually the thing that we're looking at, the analyte of
Right.
interest. It was something else that carried along with it. I mean, the other passion coming into this industry is I seen it as people always thought, oh, you're just going to test THC in flower, and I'm like, no, this is cannabis. It's going to be in absolutely everything. So, like, as an analytical chemistry's drive and perspective, it's like you got to do everything all at once.
That's
It's
right.
also
Yeah.
very nerve wracking, but it's
Every matrix you can think of.
anything
It's
you think
in.
of, put THC in it, and now you're a qualified analytical chemist. It's like the amount of work you have on your plate just doing that. It's tremendous. I mean, you roll up all the different types of analytical labs into one, and you call it new, and no one's ever really done these matrices before for these analyte sets, and there you go. I mean, that was a big driving thing for me. I saw it as an opportunity to do what I do best and like kind of get into this analytical world and work with the best of the people I could ever find. I mean, I have a great crew at both facilities. I mean, I've known a lot of them for a very long time. And it's just like the passion shines down, and people say I'm passionate. And if you talk to half my employees, they're just as passionate as I am. If I ever want to do lab fraud at my lab, I would get stopped 50 times before COAs produced because the employees would be in my office yelling at me. That's the kind of
Well,
stuff that we have.
that's the power of the culture of quality, right? Like
Yeah.
that's actually a strong part of a quality system is that cultural element. It's like they're gonna keep you in check if you ever change your mind.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean that's a good part. I think that's what you see is like people flock together. You see some great people in this
Mhm.
industry, and you always look at it, their team, and their teams are representative of exactly what that is. So who they are, what the company portrays. Yeah. So I think it's always a good thing. But that's kind of like my history of how I got into it. I don't go too far back, but I've been
Yeah.
around the plant for a long time and seen it grow and been a part of that whole thing in the past. And just applying what I was doing to the current day to move an industry forward and try to build something.
Well, and it's so funny too, hearing you bring up, going around knocking on doors, like sort of begging for testing. I remember those days before there were like testing
Regs.
rules or
Yeah.
anything, like no requirements. And so going around and just saying, like, wouldn't it be cool if you knew? Like,
Yeah.
what do you want to like understand any more about these products or get something checked out or whatever? And that's really the way things started. A lot of people don't know that, and a lot of people that have gotten into testing since have missed that era of cannabis testings, the sort of pre regulations and that sort of organic growth at the front end, which um, I love to think back on now because it's just a fascinating time. And then kind of leading into our discussion today, thinking about the evolution of the cannabis industry from that point. So talk us through some of the regulatory changes that you've been a part of because you started right as California was kind of starting to think about what their testing rules are going to look like, thinking about legalization and all of that, of what was coming down. But it's been a roller coaster since
Yes.
then in terms of changes and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I saw like I remember back when the BCC had draft regulations and they had some action levels and they changed everything to 10 parts per billion, every
Right, right.
chemical
Yeah.
residue in every matrix. And I'm like, I called them, I'm like, I quit. I'm not going to do it anymore. I know I can't do it. And for me to do that, it would be fraud. But I know we're not going to be able to achieve these. I've already been trying to do this and we're already failing. I mean, that was back in the day when we were all trying to get this on LC triple quads. And we're like, we can't do 6 to 8 compounds. And like, we had groups, organizations working on that
Yep.
stuff like we were all pushing towards. And I think that's what you see is regulations change, the methods change, people change. We get better at it. So I mean, anything we're doing today, we're probably doing 5 times better tomorrow, or the next year or two. And
Right.
like we talk about a decade in the cannabis industry. Jesus, that's have you seen change and differences and I mean cycles? It's like a lifetime for some industries. It
It
all
is.
packed into 10 years. Those beginning of the industries are the most like diverse and always evolving. I
Yeah,
mean,
turbulent.
the cannabis regulations, they kind of phased out. They call them categories, but there are always phases, phase one, two, and three. And for some reason, the industry took the word category 1, 2, and 3, which isn't bad, but I take it as it is. It doesn't. It's just a word. So
Right.
I mean, we've seen the phases out in California. We've seen other regulations. There's hardly been any testing regulation changes in California. We used to test their homogeneity of
Right, right.
edibles to make sure they,
Hmm.
everything was 10 milligrams and they had a very small tolerance. And I mean, man, I remember back when they first started, we were taking duplicate samples,
That's
and you had to
right.
test
That's right.
everything twice. Yeah, that's
Yep.
that's a while ago. And the cost per analysis, I mean, gone down. That's one thing. Like other states have evolved on adding different analysis. California's been pretty stagnant though on testing regulations. After phase 3 went into play,
Hmm.
they kind of cut a couple things, and then we haven't really seen too many changes on it as far as the regulation standpoint. That's what's always drives me and my staff is we're not this one trick pony that bought instruments that that pressed a
Right.
button.
Yeah.
I have hungry chemists and staff members that we always want to make sure we're doing the best we can, but then also what else can we do? So there's a lot of projects I do offline that aren't the voluntary compliance sampling or not sampling, excuse me, compliance testing and looking at different types of analytes or looking at different types of uh, problems presenting themselves in the industry.
Oh,
Yeah,
when
so it's definitely evolved, and we'll continue to see evolution in the industry. But I think this is a time in California we're going to see a lot of evolution. I
yeah,
really
yeah.
think the push is to public safety, and that's what it goes back to. And you'll get both oppositions here, like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Cannabis used to be sprayed with everything. Okay, well, doesn't mean people. I mean, if you look at negative health effects or negative adverse health, anything, name it. I don't want to sit there and say cancer, but you can say any lung infection, anything. Over the last like 40, 50 years, if you looked at the diagnosis, like the younger and younger age, more and more people, there's the higher percentages of everything. And we sit here
Hmm.
and we ask ourselves why. People are like, why are you taking the stand on cannabis? Well, that's the industry I'm working in. I mean, we
Right.
can probably do
Yes.
better on food. We can do better on this.
Hmm.
The thing is, you have those industries that are so hard set in their ways, you can't make a change. But maybe cannabis can be the example for everything else. And
Right.
that's what I tell people is if we all stand on each other's shoulders, we're gonna get a lot higher and get a lot further on this stuff, and necessarily like just trying to live up to an expectation that was set arbitrarily when the bus is
Right.
down the road and no one really know what to do.
Well, and what's been driving me crazy lately is a lot of states are sort of copy and pasting a lot of the regulations. They'll look at California, Oregon, Colorado with these different places, and they sort of take the pieces they like, and you'll see it word for word copied. And so it's any problems that are sort of embedded in those other regulations sort of get propagated out in states as they roll out. And I do think we're at a very interesting time point where now there's so much data. And that's something, that we're going to talk about today is taking time to stop and look back at this data. Like what have we experienced over the years and how can we learn from that to move forward in a more thoughtful, way. And so on that note, let's start to unpack kind of the problem, I guess, in case for some of you, I know you've all heard me talk about lab shopping and everything, but for anyone tuning in who's either outside of the industry or trying to understand this, start to unpack some of the issues around testing that you started to see as you were getting operating and as California went legal and everything else started to change. So it's kind of a little series of problems, and you've actually shared this data through the years. There's actually, if people dig around, you can find reports on some of the things that you've shared in this year, last year, the year before, the year before. So kind of walk through some of that as you started to, kind of think about these issues of lab shopping and stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, lab shotting in itself is a general thing. It's what we use this when not we as me, but the industry is
Mhm.
using the term lab shopping. It's saying like they're looking for favorable results from one lab versus another.
Yeah.
Let it be a THC number, let it be a passing sample, let it be something not being sampled correctly. Whatever have you, there's lab shopping going on in this industry. Now I take a step back and like analytical industry, or not normal, but the traditional analytical industries of other just general commercial products. Normally, the producer and the people testing it are very worried that they get a very accurate answer and
Hmm.
precise.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
what happens is they get lawsuits, and then they don't want
Yeah.
to harm people. I'm not saying that's what people do in this industry, but they're very cautious about shooting their labs. Like they'll request SOP packages and
Right.
everything and they'll come visit the lab and make sure everything's on the up and up. In the cannabis industry, I feel like it was like that at one time in California, and it kind of changed over the years. And this is for every state. I feel like
Yeah.
a lot of times when they get going, people valued a lot of that stuff, and then throughout the years, I mean, you can talk about just 20, let's say up to 2018. I felt was like one of the problem when it really somewhat starting to where lab shopping became like people offering me money in a
Right. It
bag
became
at
very
my
open.
doorstep. Yeah, it became
Yeah.
more open. The producers sometimes would request it, and then you saw it over the years where they did people did round robins and look, you detected all the pesticides that we put in there. You do not get the contract. What? Well,
You fail, sir. Like,
you
wait a
might
minute.
doing it accurately. You fail. It's like, hold on, wait a minute. Well, we just can't get a missed pop or I don't know, whatever the excuse is. It's not like this is day one. People always think like I'm making assumptions or anything. It's like, no, I've lived it. Let me tell you this. I've lived it for a long time. So we've seen this kind of change. Let it be labs, the lab shopping. I mean, for a while, I know that large producers had a list of labs that would pass a certain analyte. So if you had this failing analyte, you go to this lab, or you go do this or that. If you need this to be sampled incorrectly, you go to these 5 labs. They're not sampling correctly. It's been crazy, like to see that over the years. And I mean, 2018, I think I did one of the first studies. I would say, first studies I did on like massive study on shelves, just looking at chemical residue or pesticide testing. And I mean, I was seeing very high, I mean, up in the 80% of just the 66 pesticides regulated in California that were failing.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you take a look at that, you're like, man, what's going on here? Like, there has to be something. But with that being said, I want to point out there are great operators that really do everything I said. Like they screen their labs, they make sure they're doing it right. I'll tell you this: these operators are at a disadvantage and they're dying quickly.
Yeah,
because they can't compete. It's very hard onus on the operator to say, hey, I'm going to destroy this product because it fails safety testing.
Yeah.
Because right now money's tight and everything else. But I mean, throughout the years, we saw I feel like lab shopping started from the producer perspective, and then it almost changed. I feel like I don't know, it's a year, maybe 2020, 2022, like to where labs started reaching out to producers. Hey, I can do this, and that for you. Hey, I can give you better numbers. Hey, you need passing samples? I have higher LOQs and LODs. And it's one of those things. Is like you started seeing it or posting on social media, and you're like, man, it's not the opposite that you would expect from a lab industry. I mean, people might call me wrong for saying this, but like I feel like the labs are like the gateway. We're the gate holders of the public safety. I work for every person that consumes cannabis.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily work for the producers that are producing it, even though it's a horrible thing to say or think. I don't think anyone that truly understands what I'm saying there would fault me for it. But that's who we're looking out for, and that's what labs should be. And I always say this too: it's like the passion that you have to have for the analytical industry is great to be a part of this thing. I mean, we're pushing on all this kind of stuff. But I mean, that's kind of the history of lab shopping. You've seen it change and transform over the years. Let it be. So that's what I said. Lab shopping can go down to like, direct pitching of it to knowledge inside of a laboratory to a lab doing something incorrectly unknowingly.
Right.
And then that's still fraud. I mean, if you signed up to be a doctor and do surgery, you can't just be like, oh, I didn't know how to do that. Sorry, they died. That's not how that
they
works.
put me in the operating room. I did my best.
Yeah, I did my best. All right. So like this is the kind of stuff that you really hope the industry is stopping and the lab shopping. But I mean, I'll tell you this, and it's across the country. I'm not picking on California or anyone. Every state has different problems for lab shopping or different types of fraud going on. And I hope it fixes. And that's one of those things like you saw, like even instrument manufacturers producing methods and writing SOPs on a method for a product they never brought in house. I mean, most manufacturers weren't bringing in real cannabis matrix. And that's the problem when you do an analytical method validation. You need to do in matrix validations. You can't just be like, oh, I just inject something else, and here's a standard I keep injecting. It works perfectly. But when I put it into a complex matrix, or like the material that you're working on, you don't see it. So like, I think over the years, it's an industry like, I mean, I know instrument manufacturers had instruments that didn't do the required testing. They found out years later, and then they have a new instrument that does it, and they discount their old one, like, or say like discredit the old one's being able ability to do it. And it's like, wait, there's 10 people who've been using that in California for 5 years.
Right, right, right.
Can't work. It doesn't work. Hold on.
Like, what? We need to have another discussion here. Yeah, yeah.
So you've seen it change over the years. I think I wish I could say it's necessarily getting better. I think there's different states and different people are doing different things, but there are some improvements over the years, I would say.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing that's worth pausing on is reflecting on, for those listening that maybe get a little freaked out about everything that they're hearing around all the lab shopping. Would you say that the overall quality of cannabis products has improved over time, even, despite the challenges we still face?
Yeah, I would say in the legal market of cannabis. So let's
Yeah.
caveat that
Yes. Yeah.
because that, I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, why are you bashing on the legal market? And I'm not. I'm saying it's improved. It's just not as safe as it should be sometimes.
Yes. Right.
Because we're holding ourselves to a standard of whatever it's set out in a state, then we should be complying with that standard and maybe even going above and beyond. The other markets I've done a lot of testing in, I looked at hemp products
Right. Right.
or hemp products. If you're not watching,
Right.
I'm
Right.
quoting.
Yeah.
And then listed markets. I've looked into. I mean, I've gone into listed market shops and tested products, and
Yeah.
even in California, like 75 to 80% are failing for the pesticides listed in California. 66, or
Mhm.
potencies are way off, or whatever have you. It's like, or microbe fails. There's so much. There's problems with it, and I would say if you're going to bet the best bet to get a safe product, you go to a legal cannabis dispensary in the state, and what you do is you find a brand that's going above and beyond.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
know that's some research, and not everyone's going to do it, but cheapest doesn't always mean best.
That's right. That's right.
Cheapest doesn't always mean safest. But if you look into a lot of the producers that go above and beyond, you'll find them, and they're out there doing it. And that's why I always urge people to do is you find the brands you trust, you learn to trust, and you kind of
Mhm.
shop their products, and you find what you like.
That's
Don't go
right.
shop products on THC numbers and, oh, I need this flower. It's 58%. It's going to be so much better. No, it's the same 28, 22% as the rest of them.
Well,
Not all of them, but we can get into that later.
well, would you say that even just the throwing the THC number in front of people, is that part of the problem?
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's a systemic problem of why even lab shopping started. I mean, that has to be like 2020. Like I'll talk in California, and I
Right.
know other states don't have as big of a problem as California. Like I remember like flower itself, flower pre-roll, it started to become this thing of, oh, I need 20%. It's like, wait, 19.5 doesn't, no, it doesn't say 20%. The dispensaries and the bud tenders are not selling my product, or the dispensaries won't
That's
even
right.
buy my
That's right.
product. That was like 2020,
Hmm.
2021, 2022. It creeped up, it goes up to 25. So magically overnight, every strain, instead of producing sub 25%, started producing 25%. And
Yep.
this is a lab problem. And then, I mean, I'll tell you this, in 2023 going into 24, it ended at 28.5 or 30% to get into a store. So what does that mean? If we're really
That's
doing that, and then that
wild. Yeah.
was, yeah, we're eliminating cultivars, we're eliminating some of the people's favorite flower. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people in this industry for years, and like some of the growers, I mean, they don't use me because I told them not to. I mean, I mean, I had conversations in 2022 and stuff with people that I've known in the industry. They're like, Josh, they won't let me on the shelf. I can't sell any of my product. What do I do? And I'm like, don't die on this sword. I'm in a little chemist that's not going to create fraud, but if you're telling me that this is not me
Hmm.
saying it, that there's other
Yeah.
people offering you it, you can take that risk and do it. But then I always ask myself, if people are doing one thing incorrectly or fraudulent in a lab, then how many others are they doing? I'm not
Exactly.
saying
Yeah.
people are or aren't. I'm not pointing fingers at specific people or anything, but it's just a general history of the industry, what we've seen.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And for people that are less familiar with what goes on in the testing labs, and I know this gets complicated because I've done multi-hour lectures on this. You've put together long presentations and stuff on this too. But to put it into a nutshell, how we'll start with potency, but this also relates to pesticides, metals, and microbiology as well. Um, for the audience, non-technical audience, how are these labs getting away with it?
So that's it. I did write an article with or they published it with me and Eric Paulson from my laboratory colleague. We wrote an article, a 3-part series on, just if you want to talk potency,
Hmm.
flower and pre-rolls inflation. And what we did is we acquired a bunch of samples from the retail and then tested them. And then we wrote different ways for the possibility of doing it. So like an example, so if I have to add 10 milliliters or something and I add 8 milliliters, now my dilution's less and the result looks larger. I'm just giving you an example.
Yep.
Or if you weigh I should be weighing a half a gram and I weigh 0.6 grams and I just write 0.5. So
Yep.
all these ways that we ended up doing it on a large sample set, but like we didn't do it theoretically. We took the sample label, we did around a bunch of tests to kind of categorize and see, oh, here's what it is if you test it appropriate or test it with the standards that's set out.
Hmm.
Here's what you do if you throw this in there, then that in there. What I'm doing is putting equal. Oh
Just
look,
seeing the bumps.
yeah.
Yeah.
How you get it? Oh, this person, look, they only did this little thing and then it was correct, or they did all 5 propagation of error. I mean, honestly, this would be my opinion, is I don't think it's unknowingly. People know now out of the years because you've seen it change. And what I mean by that is if you look at the same cultivar from the same producer, and they used to test with you at 18%, and now
Hmm.
they're testing at 35%.
Right.
Something's changed here. Either as his testing lab, it's you or it's them.
And as a
And you can't
scientist, if you're
change
seeing this, there should be like some things going off of either like something weird's going on, or this is a very exciting find
yeah.
to see that they've been able to turn this around so much.
I mean, cultivars change. I mean, a single cultivar, if you're really talking about a cannabis cultivar, plus or
Right.
minus 4 to 5%. Then
Yeah.
you get the
Yeah.
counter argument that it's just a batch. If you look at one bud on a plant, the worst bud versus the best bud, you can have major variation. Yeah, but the thing is,
Some.
yeah, you can have variation. I'll agree with that. But the thing is, if we're actually taking representative samples and we're homogenizing the whole batch so that
Right.
it depicts an average. And then when you buy cannabis, you don't buy little quarter-gram nugs at a time, do you? No, you buy a bag of them, and if you homogenize that bag, it's probably going to be the same as the average, plus or minus, 5, 10 relative
Yep.
percent, meaning that a 20 becomes a 22 or
That's what I was
an
gonna say. Yeah.
18. Yeah,
Relative percent is very important for people to
very,
understand.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it stays tight, and I've done some studies on that. In that same study I mentioned, like we went out and purchased, because in 2023 I had one flower client left.
Oh no.
Shout out to
Wow.
Josh, Farmer's Cup. He's helping out. I normally don't do this, but the guy's like, you know what? I know what you're doing is right, and like he's just stuck with it.
That's
He's like,
awesome. That's
more
awesome.
important about accuracy and things like that. And like I did it to his samples. I went and acquired a bunch of them around the shelves in San Diego, and I skewed it back to a batch I tested 4 months previously of his in compliance testing. And every sample that I went and acquired from different shelves being handled differently by different
Yeah.
everything, that all came back in that window. I think it was plus or
Yep.
minus
Yep.
7%.
Yeah.
So I think they're all like right there, like right in 2% and stuff. So that's like add a little run to run error stuff. That's fine. So that's why I think that argument is one of those things. Is this industry, people put an argument out there and then no one ever checks it and it becomes the truth.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember back in the early days for fun, I did some of those investigations of like, what is it like, the top buds, the middle buds, the low
Yeah,
buds, all of these different things. And yeah, you see a spread for sure. You for sure see a spread, but it's not as large of a spread
yeah.
that would explain the spread that we see of some of these numbers today. To see, like you're saying, something go from a 16, 17% on average flower up to now a 32, 35, like that is beyond possible, in terms of statistical variation that we're accustomed to seeing.
And that's the thing, is like I would say to anyone, any person that consumes cannabis, do not use that as your metric of buying.
Yeah.
It's the most irrelevant thing to buy on, because guess what? Hold your hidden for a half a second longer. You just probably 25% increase to the total THC intake. Okay. If you really wanted to do it, if you're holding your head until it's gone every time, maybe
Yep.
start shopping that high end, but I don't know who that's doing that. I
I
remember a kid once, but like that's all you have to do, because
yeah, I
that's how
mean,
that works.
in some of my classes when I would teach in person, I used to do a little breakdown and say, okay, let's say you've got flour that's testing 25% and you got flour at 19%. we started looking at milligrams per gram. We start looking at the pharmacodynamics that we know of. We start thinking about how much is actually made to your bloodstream, blah, 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 blah. Then you get down to nanograms per mil of blood. We're talking extremely, like almost imperceptible differences in dose when we're talking about, these differences in flower. Yet people get so caught up on it. And I mean, I've been doing part-time work at a dispensary consulting clients, and I see this all the time. I have customers that come in and say, no, I can tell the difference. I can tell when it's 30%, 25% or not. And I don't get into arguments, that's not my role there to like, but I do try to challenge them some and talk from my experience. I'm like, well, I've had things that are 14% that you probably could
Well,
not tell, you know.
and it
Um,
probably put you on your butt too. I
yeah,
mean,
that's
you
right.
get so that's what I always say. This is the wrong metric to do, and I've been fighting that for a long time. And I don't necessarily even think it's just terpenes. Terpenes are important.
Right. I
It's
agree.
not just
Yeah.
terpenes. There's a lot
Yep.
of things that we're not even looking at. You got to remember, our regulations mandate us to test what 50 analyte, 100
Right,
analyte,
right, right.
something like that total.
Narrow sliver of,
Yeah,
yeah,
narrow sliver of what could be. You look at a single hole where you have thousands of analytes.
yeah,
Look at all the different ones. You're going to start seeing diversity in all this stuff. And I mean, it's not just any of that. It's getting away from that, and then getting away. I think the bud tenders need to stop selling it. I mean, it's
yeah,
an easy sale tactic, but I think it's without even a working lab system in any
right.
state, it doesn't work. You have to have the grading. It's like think about like how you grade a diamond.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
right? If that grading system died, as in like all diamonds are just being graded by the testing labs, and testing labs started doing fraudulent results, or they're not doing it intentionally, but their instruments broke and they test a diamond. Now you start buying diamonds without this
Hmm.
3Cs or whatever, and it goes all haywire because who's getting ripped off? The customer, the producer, the miner, everything's
Hmm.
going all the way down the line. I think that's what we have to take step back for. I mean, I really wish someone would do the largest Pepsi challenge of bud and
Yeah,
have like
yeah.
18, a 22, a 25, and a 30, and have people randomly do it and choose what rank these. And then they would
Yeah.
statistically probably find out there's no ranking to them.
That's right.
Um,
That's right. Yep.
but I think the consumer would have to take that, and that's the sad part is I think it was beating the consumer's head. Like the higher the THC number, the better the quality of an inhalable flower product. I mean, that happened in the
Hmm.
vape pen market too, or the
Yeah.
concentrate market. I mean, I still remember this is like a year ago, probably still 120, 110, 120% total composition of a vape pen. So you'd have THC or cannabinoids at 105, terpenes at 12. You know what I mean? It's like,
It's synthesizing compounds as it's sitting in the pin.
I don't know. It's like I understand you can have some error in a lab, but
Right.
there's a thing called bias. And as a
Yeah.
lab, anyone that's running a lab should understand what a bias is. If you're creating a bias in your analytical testing results, you have a problem, and you are creating an error. So
Yeah.
you fix that. I mean, that's the thing. Let's circle back. I mean, this might go above a lot of people. I mean, there's a CRM manufacturer that told me he understands lab shopping now. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, there's a large CRM manufacturer. I'm not gonna name names. And
Hmm.
he's like, yeah, my clients started calling me as in the testing labs are like, hey, your THC standard produces lower numbers than your competition of flower.
Oh, wow.
You need to fix that. And he's like,
Hmm.
what do you mean fix it? We have all these studies done. Here it is, every traceability on it. Oh no, well, if you don't fix it, I'm just gonna leave. And then they're starting to feel it too. And
Hmm.
that's what that really it's like this fight for this number. And I go back and I say you remove the number, then you remove the THC numbers from products, but at the same time, it's like, isn't the THC number the whole reason why this industry exists? If Delta 9 THC wasn't being measured, then we could just sell it as a regular food product. But we don't. We're a regular plant. But it
Yeah.
isn't. The one sole thing that makes it called cannabis, we should probably get that right at some time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to argue or say people are intentionally always doing it wrong or this or that. You'll see it throughout the industry, but I kind of wish we just had something a little bit better on this, and we could take action on it or see a change in the industry to ask for a product based upon that. I go back to like the customers should be looking at brands, looking at who they follow, find the strains they like, try new ones, but don't just grade it on a THC number.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a tricky thing because it seems like at some point, there does need to be this de-emphasizing of the THC value, but at the same time, you can't completely eliminate it.
Yeah.
Like it plays a role, and there is some. value to kind of like this grading model, to having some, at least some tiers of potency of product and everything, but how to steer that focus away from like, oh, like you're saying, we have to cross the 20% limit, the 25% limit, the 28% limit.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it's
mean,
tough.
back to your question too, like the how you're systematically doing this over the years. I mean, it's hard to say this is just an accident. The
Hmm.
sad part is like most regulatory bodies, they don't have internal testing labs that they do now, and how much is a variation is enough, how much is it, and then to take action on this, and they need to do it. I mean, it goes back to all the testing. I mean, state labs should be ran, but I don't think it's always just the only thing needed. As in
Hmm.
state audit checks. I mean, they do
Right.
that in other industries to make sure, let's just stick with we talked about pesticides. Pesticides aren't being used on the plant that's not supposed to be. These are agricultural products. They have allowable limits on
Hmm.
certain pesticides on products, but normally those are done with an EPA study. That pesticide was produced for an intended use to be
Right.
put on a specific product, and normally that's a higher concentration that they allowable limit, and they go lower concentrations when they don't go to the necessarily intended use. You can go look this up. I do it. I get bored. I look at
Hmm.
the EPA website way
Yep.
too
Yep.
much. I look at other. I read these data
It's been
packages
quite a few. Yeah.
and it's sad. I mean, the thing is, like a lot of this takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and that's what I say is like we all started. I mean, I'm not as good as I'm better. My lab is better than it was the day one.
Yeah. Of
Day two
course.
I was better than that. Day three I was better than that. Every day you should be
Hmm.
improving something, and the improvement should be getting more accurate and precise answer. And I think that's it always changes. So we as an industry can work on that. How it goes on for so long, I think the regulators definitely need more help, more enforcement, more ability to take action on this kind of stuff and make sure things are going right. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've talked a good bit about the potency side of the lab fraud. What have you seen in terms of other
Yeah.
types of fraud going on in the industry? Obviously the LA Times article brought attention to pesticides. But I also know, just knowing people in the industry, I know that there's fraud going on around metals and around microbiology and stuff too. So can you speak a little bit to that, getting beyond THC, what's going on and what's driving some of that?
So I mean, we'll go to like pesticides. I mean, pesticides, like I
Hmm.
said, in the legal market were a lot worse back then. It's gotten a lot better if you key in on the 66 pesticides in
Yeah.
California or other states that are the key list. You'll key on it and see over the years it cleans up, and it takes time really
Hmm.
because the producers are using something and it goes downhill, and then it takes time to get off the shelf. Um, but as far as what we've seen in that, we've seen large fail rates in the illicit market or as well, or the hemp
Hmm.
market or air quote hemp market with high amounts of contamination. If you look off list, that's a study that we've done too. Is we have a panel that runs 350 plus pesticides commonly used on agricultural products. People are like, why are you doing those? And it's like just being used. Let's see what people are doing. And so you
Yeah.
get some alarming results in that category of, oh, look, they figured out which of the 66 not to use. And then there's the 5,000, which we don't scan for because no one's doing it and the state should be
Yeah.
doing it. So I worked on a large project on that over the last year or so. But then you kind of go into what kind of keeps going. Microbial in California, there we have not that much microbial analysis getting done. Where other states,
Hmm.
there's other types like a lot of plating and other things of that nature. And I always plating's good, but plating could be improved upon. Like everything can be improved upon.
Right.
Probably pick out species of the microbe that are going to be harmful, not just a general microbe class.
Yeah.
It's almost like a stereotyping, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think of a lot of the yeast and mold testing stuff as more of just like a bioburden qualitative assay than anything, even though it's used very quantitatively,
Yeah.
um, for better or worse. But that's usually how I think of it. It's like gives you a good sense of just your overall fungal bioload.
I've seen a lot of data on microbial analysis. Let's say for if it has a colony forming units per gram, like they'll have a limit. I'm just going to make it up
Hmm.
10,000. And
Right.
for whatever reason, there's an asymptote of testing data if you pull it all together,
Yeah.
right at up to 9,999.
Right.
And for
Right.
some reason, it stops right there. So I think if you ask the microbial load to not grow past
Right. It's
something,
like
they
we need
adapt very
one less colony, please. Okay, thank you.
yeah, I mean, so there's interesting data. I know you'll probably talk to some other people about the data analysis. I've been looking at data for a long time. Microbial contamination, you're seeing DCC, if we go back to California, DCC recalls on Aspergillus, not quite a bit. I mean, it could be sample, it could be anything. A lot of the speculation on what that goes into that. Metals analysis, I mean, years ago, again, like the industry improves. The
Hmm.
cartridges used to degrade the metal. So what I mean by that is you get leaching. So
Right.
cheap cartridges made with metals that aren't intended for an inhalation, or the ones being tested for, let's say in California, there's only 4 metals. They call them the 4 big or something.
Hmm.
I highly recommend that gets extended out.
Yes, I agree.
You could see that there's lists that are put out for metal inhalation
Hmm.
directly for what's going on in this industry, and the list is not 4, by the way. There's federal
Mm.
limits for this at I think it's what, 18 or 20 of them.
I was gonna say, yeah, it's like more than 15 or so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like 18 or
Hmm.
somewhere in there. But why aren't we doing that? Because we're only regulated to do 4. I'm not trying to scare people in any such way, but I would say that I remember we started doing accelerated studies of vape carts or any kind of cartridges or something that holds a concentrate in it that's a metal,
Yeah.
and you would see like exponential contamination happening. So over time, you'll just get a big
Yeah.
asymptote of increase of metal load because it's just degrading the cartridge. Over
Right.
the years, though, we've seen that improve with people manufacturing cards, creating higher quality metals or using high quality metals to produce the vaporizer cartridge or whatever have you, and you're seeing it go away. I mean, I remember people used to fill their carts and test their carts within 24 hours, so then
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
contamination level stays down. But then there's a lot of great producers out there that have been doing these things like the studies, extended life, shelf life studies, and accelerated studies on these things for years. Let's see what other contaminant residual solvents. Again, that's a list that's always interesting because we only
Yeah.
scan for a
Yeah.
certain amount, and then if you want me to name 10 other solvents I could use for any type of process, that we could, that wouldn't on the list. Um, but those are all those get. That's like the industry in a nutshell. It's like we should look at these
Hmm.
things. There should be some screening off lists that are given out, and we make sure we have a safer product. And that's the push. And I know I'm asking a lot from an industry and saying we should go above and beyond because everyone, oh, well, look at tobacco or look at this plant.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
wait, do you want to end up in the tobacco land? Like, I don't
Right.
think
Is that what we're
tobacco
wanting to
really.
emulate?
I don't think we all want to be there. I don't think we want to be named as that. I don't think a lot of the producers out there want to like want if that happened, you would feel horrible.
Right.
What's that spin on it. So again, like the improvement of the industry is what's needed, but we have seen it. It's not just potency. It's not potency inflation. It's all of it. It's the combination. That's
Hmm.
what we're back to lab shelving. Like I said in the beginning, like the list of who gives the highest potency or the passing pesticides or this or that. It's been widely known in the industry for a long time. And not everyone's using that. There are producers out there that surely took advantage of that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's kind of
And
the
some
sad
that
part.
take advantage of it for a while and then stop. And so like there's, it's funny, like when you're in the industry long enough, you see different companies, both labs and producers, that sort of go through their fraud phase and then sort of come out of it on the other side and course correct and things like that. Or I don't know, it's really interesting to see the trends. And in some of the data sets that I've seen, you can see some of that. You can see when producers have changed labs, how their market share changed, how their the value of their products changed, how the market share of that lab changed in relation to that producer switching over. I think people underestimate the stories that come out of the data when you start to really look at it.
And that's one thing I've always promoted is free the data. Why metric, like metric is the biggest one in the I think nation as far as data
Hmm.
collection. Why is that data not public? Why is
Yeah.
it such a fight to get that data or just completely denied in certain states? But then you have certain states that publicly make everything available. That's what should be happening. Why? Because data tells a story. Like people get mad at me because they're like, "Oh, you're just conjecturing or making up stuff," or Or I'm like, no, I'm looking at data and then telling you my interpretation
Don't
of
shoot the
data.
messenger.
Yeah, that, that's exactly it. And that's the thing is, if you can look at the data as a whole, there is some problems with looking at data as a whole now too.
Hmm.
Uh, because if you have too many labs creating wrong data sets, you
Yeah.
miss.
Yep.
So like I remember I've been asked like, oh, we should look at the metric data for possible pesticide hits. I'm like, yeah, it'll help, but it also missed a lot of stuff too. You know what I mean? Or
Hmm.
a THC number. It depends when you did it. I mean, if you looked at data in California, I mean, like I said in the beginning, back in past 2020, everything hardly stuff was over 25 to 28%. That was
Right.
very rare. And
Yep.
I personally think a lot of this stuff is like a bell-shaped curve, or if you're potency
Right.
out on, yeah, you're gonna get 1% of it over 30. You know, the rest of it lies closer to that average. I think that's what needs to change kind of industry. More focus on these things, improving.
And what do you think about one thing I talked to some folks about at ACS recently was this idea of double blinding the compliance testing process. Basically, for not for R&D, but for actual compliance, the producer wouldn't know what lab tested their product. The lab wouldn't know whose products they have until it's all done.
And so, do you be like a client of the state? I've said that in multiple interviews in the past. Like, if a state just, you know, this person put into a system, I need a pickup, and then it says, oh, this person's in geographical in the area of their service and their service time, and then they assign it. I think that would be great. But even if you let your producers pick the labs, I think that's good too. But I think there should be another step, and it should be a blind step to them. What I mean by that
Hmm.
is this: every 0.1%, I'm just making a number. Let's make it every 1% so
Yeah.
we can cover this easily. Every 1% of the samples get double blinded by another lab. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
created
Yep.
these batches, and every 100 samples I produced, it automatically metric freezes that thing, or hold whatever hold the state does in the sample, and it can't be moved. And another lab has to be out there within a day or two.
Yeah.
So, you know what I
Yep.
mean? And then collects the sample and tests it again. I mean,
Yep.
the thing is, I'll tell you this: if a lab's being scrutinized by a regulatory body, not a lot of error, it seems like anymore. But
Well, and
that's very interesting. Yeah.
this is actually a point I was going to make. It's funny, we've talked about producers have these lists of like they'll use these labs under these scenarios and everything. But something I experienced, and I guarantee you've experienced this too, just knowing how things work. It's funny how much producers care about accurate data when they're doing R&D, like true R&D. Um, it's funny how they tend to come back to the accurate labs for that work, but then it's pass around the paper for who do we go for compliance testing once we're ready to get things on the shelves.
So
And
that's one of the reasons why we're in business.
yeah,
Are interesting. So I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, that was basically, I was
Yeah.
just gonna say like, it's the there's a clear pattern that there is a concern for accurate information. It's just a very narrow situation where they don't want it accurate.
Yeah, business to business sales. I mean, we do a lot of the R&D testing for the state of California, and like things pass through our lab. It's in one product or another. There's like a lot of it's just being sold from one person to another, and the accuracy. There's labs out there that slowly do that. But compliance testing, been over the years, minimal revenue stream, if you want to call it revenue, but our testing basis.
Hmm.
What happens to the oils or flour that we see that fail? I don't know, because I
Right.
don't know what happened to it. They do fail though. Yeah, but that's kind of what you see in the industry for the R&D stuff. It's kept us around, the accuracy and things like that.
Well, and I guess this is a good question to ask. Speaking to the other lab operators out there that are trying to do good work and are holding on, struggling to survive, because I know most of the labs that existed when we were building our first lab and some of the other labs, they don't generally exist anymore. And I'm trying to think, I think all the companies I used to work for don't exist anymore. So those operators that are still hanging on, what is your advice to them from one lab operator to another?
It's hard. And so my thing is, so like you talk about like me in the media for the last 2 years, year and a half, 2 years, I've kind of said, hey, I'm not trying to be famous or do anything to get my name out there or do this or that or be a public speaker. But at some point, you got to say something. If we sit
Yeah.
here and just say something or think it, nothing's going to get done. That's why a lot of the stuff I brought to the media and brought to attention, or I get reached out now. I went to an interview. I'll get on an interview with someone that says counterpoints to me.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it. I think we all should have a time to talk about it or speak about this kind of stuff. I think the lab operators that are struggling and you are consistent, you're doing the right thing in this industry to protect the public safety. You should work with people and get loud about it. I mean, do the shelf testing, show the producers, bring it to the producers, show them what's going on, bring it to the regulators, show it to them, bring it to the media. I mean, I think it's a people get upset about it and mad. I'll say a lot of the cases. I mean, people say like, "Oh, you're a rat" or anything like that. It's like, no, public safety is not. Call me that. I'm fine being it. But I think that's the last chance. But the thing is, you can find great operators. But
Yeah.
there are great operators in all these states. I mean, a lot of times they work with the people that have been doing it for a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So a lot of times the labs they are coming up and going, and I mean, there's labs just getting their license in California, and I mean, I'm not saying run, but if you can save money, you might not want to do it. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
not trying to own a market or anything. It's just like I talk to people all the time about this very thing, and like that's the thing is I have an open door policy. I don't care if you hate me. I don't
Yeah.
care if you publicly say I'm a POS. You can come in my door and talk to me, and I'll help you as much as I can. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As far as any of us will do it. And I think that's the thing that the operators got to know. It's like if you're doing the right thing, keep doing it. I mean, I've seen a lot of people. I've known a lot of labs in the past, not just California, that like they told me, hey, I can't afford payroll. I can't afford rent. There's
Yeah.
nothing I left to do. I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm just gonna potency puff, or I'm gonna pass some samples for this one producer so I can get back on my feet. And then it's this downward spiral of
Yeah.
fraud, and then they end up getting shut down or being controlled by that. I think that's sad. I would say hold your ground, do the best you can. There's people out there doing it right. Contact them, talk to them. A lot of us all have ideas. We're glad to share it.
Yeah.
I'm part of a group called ACIL, American Council for Independent Laboratories. It's an analytical group that's been around for 100 years, but I'm the co-chair of the Cannabis and Hemp division.
Hmm.
We're out there. We're trying to change regulations. We're trying to make it aware, not just fighting or telling on people, but like setting a bar. Like we all have to set a bar, but we have to make sure everyone's up to that bar at the same
Yeah.
time. And that's what
Yeah.
we have to do to get past it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, going back to your point about whether to start a lab, as someone who doesn't have a lab in space, I can concur with your opinion that it is generally not a wise decision. Uh, if your goal is to make money relatively quickly in any normal sort of time frame for a startup, it's going to be tough. But
I
one
would say,
thing that,
I would hold up real quick, just because you
yeah,
said if you come into the lab industry to make money, the analytical testing industry, you're in the wrong industry. You
yeah,
have to
yeah,
come in this industry for passion and the
yeah.
love of what you do, because that's gonna the only way to make it through it.
Yeah, I mean, just to highlight, just some of the crazy experiences that you experience in lab testing. Like I remember one time when I lived in Oregon and we were operating a lab there. I mean, I had a guy come in with his pit bull, his gun strapped to his side, um, I need my pesticide results in 5 minutes. And you're like, you just sort of laugh at first. You're like, what? Like that's not even a real thing.
Yeah.
And then they're looking you dead in the eye and saying, no, 5 minutes. Like that's the kind of stuff that like sometimes we had to deal with that I think people really it's hard for people to understand.
Yeah.
Like, they think of the lab and they think it's more of like a normal, I guess, traditional sort of clinical lab situation or whatever, but it's a weird place
It,
with the way the industry is.
and that's what I've talked to people that like, oh, I ran like a clinical lab, or I run this type
Hmm.
of lab for years. I'm going to come to cannabis space. I'm like, you got to buckle up. Buckle up, because you have a different. I don't care how long you've been testing anything. This is its own industry, and it's very specific. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of caveats, like you're saying, like 5 minute turnaround time. But if you want to take it back to reality, I mean, like that's the other thing. The labs, like originally, it was this fight of who can do things quicker, and I'm like, man, quicker doesn't always mean better, and like you're
Yeah.
really beating yourself down. So like to be quick, I operate 16 hours a day. That's the only way
Mhm.
I can be quick enough. I have more instruments in this
Yep.
my facility in California than most. I'd say most more than I don't know if it's
Yeah,
more, I want to say, but we have a lot of instrumentation because we have backups, things that's running.
that's right.
Only way to keep the turnaround times down. And then like
Yep.
that was the thing that everyone competed on was price, turnaround time. Now price became unaffordable almost to operate a
Yep.
laboratory unless you're running massive amounts of samples. The turnaround time is so fast, and there's people offering it. Oh, I'll do it today. And it's that crazy thing. Like you talked about the 5 minute joke. I bet you he's like, that conversation I've had. Hey, if you can't do it in 5 minutes, I have five other people that do it in 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
it's
Oh
like,
yeah. Yeah,
all
exactly.
right, go for it. That's always my answer. Go see
Yep.
what you get from it.
Yep.
Um,
That was
yeah,
basically our experience. I mean, we bled customers, and that's that's just sort of how it was. I don't know. I pride myself as having a prior reputation for low numbers, because when you look at our old data, it's like our averages were spot on with what we actually see nationwide.
we're seeing 22, 24s, somewhere there in the average.
Yeah, I mean anywhere, I mean really, so we started in 2013,
Mm,
so it was a little lower
yeah.
coming up there because it started off around 16 to 18, then moved up into like 2022. Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
I think the other thing is like this is the thing that I go back to. It's like what you did is you killed the cultivars, right? So the ones that
Yeah, yeah,
work,
yeah, yeah. The selection
people
pressure
stop
is
using them.
crazy.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
selection process where it's not just a lab product. It's like people just stopped growing the traditional stuff
Hmm.
that everyone loved because it didn't have the cultivar didn't create high enough THC number. And I think that's what's sad. And I mean, I've talked to some very large, long term operators in the cannabis space
Yeah.
that grows, and they're like, hey, I can't even grow half the stuff. I only grow the stuff I like, and I only have it for myself because I
Yeah.
can't sell it on the market.
Yeah.
And these are the people that have been doing it for
Yep.
30, 40 years.
Yep.
Yeah.
I got friends that have totally bailed on growing that had been doing it for decades and decades, had, developed all sorts of really interesting strains. And they're just sort of at a point now where like this isn't a game I can play. This isn't what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to grow what in my mind is quality cannabis. And that's not really related to this number. It's related to the overall experience and the smell, the presentation, everything. And I have one friend of mine in California actually who was a grower who went back to being a geologist. Like it is like one of our like science, buddies is also a grower, and he's like, man, it's like I think I'm about done. It's a depressing, in one sense, but he's like just the nature of the industry has changed so much, and the things that selection pressure is very real between not only you have the selection pressure on testing, selection pressure on turnaround time for the grow, how fast can we flip it, that sort of thing. In other states where you can't even grow outdoors, you have then the selection pressure of what will grow indoors well and flip fast. So you have this just narrowing of selections. That I get really bummed about because I remember a lot of these strains that used to be around and a lot of these smells that I don't come across in dispensaries anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
it's sad.
that's what I think the selection process, you even said it too, is like the guy went back to geology. I mean, every, I mean, I've been going to conferences, I feel, since 2016, 2017, from the the first Emerald conference I went to.
Nice,
The,
nice. Yeah, I was at that one too. That's
the
cool.
first
Yeah.
CSC conference I went to. I mean,
Yeah.
up in Oregon, that red
Yep.
line.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
I mean, so the thing is, like, over the years, like, I look back and I'm like, man, the great faces in this, the people that cared, the scientists that came in and brought a lot to this industry, every conference, another one's gone, I feel like.
Yes. Yes, I
And
agree. Yep.
not gone as in didn't show up to the conference. They left the industry. They're like, I
Yeah.
can't do it anymore. I really hope we like there's a group of us that really push this stuff, and I think we have it in there to keep pushing. But I mean, everyone breaks after a certain amount of time. If
Yeah.
that's the thing, if people don't care about it, the quality analysis, then at some time, you're packing up shop and leaving.
When you care about scientific integrity and you're operating in an industry that doesn't reward or incentivize valuing that, It's really tough. It is extremely tough. And I mean, I'll say I've gone through burnout like 3 or 4 times at this point. I feel like I tell people now, I feel like I'm impervious because it's like once you've burned out enough times, but you're still here, it's like, okay, I feel like, I can get through whatever. But I've noticed the exact same thing. I actually commented about this in a couple of conferences I went to this year to some of my friends. I was like, a lot of the faces that I would see regularly because I kind of took a break from the conference circuits basically around COVID time 2020 for a few years, and I was like, they're gone. Like most of the people are gone. And like you said, it's not that they're just not coming to the conference; they are not participating in this industry anymore. And some of these people were like leaders, like were really pushing a lot of progressive research into contaminant testing and all the sort of stuff that completely pulled out. And my hope is that over time, if we can start to fix these incentive structures, which I think really is kind of the core problem, just we have some really bad incentive structures with how the regulations are set up right now. If some of that can be tweaked, I would like to see a sort of revival of these scientists that were working in this industry because they did have passion, they cared, and they just weren't incentivized or rewarded for bringing that. And if to see them come back would be amazing.
Yeah, but
Um,
yeah, if you talk about burning out, I mean, all of us, I mean, we all get there. I mean, I feel like you say you break a candle in half, light it on both ends. I crushed my candle, stomped on it, and lit on
right.
gasoline for years now. I'm like, there hasn't been a candle for a long time, but I've somehow I keep going.
The wick's
Um,
gone. We're just
yeah,
cultivating a flame in air.
yeah, the past wax is getting tossed back and forth. But I mean, we do this, and like I feel like sometimes it takes a lot. I mean, there's another issue that we see in other states, not necessarily California, but like I'll say Michigan. Michigan, the amount of stuff being sold on the shelf in concentrates that are
Mm,
actually synthetically produced from CBD and
yeah,
not
yeah,
even extracted from
yeah,
marijuana or
yeah.
cannabis is out of control. I mean, the last study I just did, this is like a couple of weeks ago, it was only 50 samples. It's a long about way I got here, but I had to run them all for conversion. So I have a validated method in the state of Michigan to determine if the concentrate comes from cannabis, if it comes
Hmm.
from hemp, or it comes from synthetically produced. Um, and 40 about 44% were synthetically produced being sold in the legal cannabis market in the state of Michigan. This is
Yeah,
concentrate.
yeah,
To
yeah,
me, that's
yeah.
utterly insane. Like, first of all, you can't even get into the system legally. Our regulations are not set up to regulate a synthetic
Hmm.
process. If you want to call it semi-synthetic because you learn some hemp words or something, that's not a real thing. You're doing synthetic chemistry, you're creating a synthetic compound, and there's no standards being followed. Like we have, that's why we have an FDA, and
Yeah,
there's a reason why we have pharma regulations that most people don't ever read or ever get involved in because people are getting fined billions and sued if not. And then like we're now bringing that into the system. This industry is tough, and that's what I say is like even I commend the regulators. Like they're fighting 50 battles at once, and once you focus on one, the other 49 of them get ahead of you, and then you're like shit. And it's
right.
like I feel like that's how it always is. You start to see progress on one thing, and other things start taking going backwards. And I think there will be a change one day. And I'm not saying there's a lot of bad product everywhere, but it
Right.
goes back to it's a lot scarier for a legal industry than I would assume it would.
Right, right, yeah. And I've seen this exact same thing, so I relocated relatively recently from Oregon back to my home state of Mississippi, and here there is a 60% limit on concentrates. So what does that mean? It means we get hemp-derived THCV and CBN and CBG and all of these all of the different isolates that are popular on the hemp side, and they're getting brought over somehow magically
Yeah.
and being mixed in with these concentrates and then being presented to consumers as if it's like, no, this is rosin straight from the plant, pressed and everything. Like, well, why is it kind of chunky and tastes really acrid, like you've added isolates to it?
So that's one thing. And then the other thing with that limit that makes me very disgusted is what else could you do? You could
Yeah,
dilute it with a carrier, right? So
yeah.
this brings up a study that I did in Michigan, but I've done it in other places too, where we start looking at what other things are. So like you start to see like 60, 70% total cannabinoids in a sample. You're like,
Hmm.
what's the other 30%? Oh yeah, I remember vitamin E acetate. That was another 30%. That didn't go well for anyone, but that's still in the hemp industry. Hemp, air quotes. I just
Right.
got samples the other day with it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
off shelf stuff. But like looking at this stuff, it's like we did some big screening panels on dilutants being used.
Yep.
And it's scary, like the toxicities of dilutants being heavily used at 10, 20 percentile.
Yeah.
They'll say in the SDS, do not inhale if inhaled, contact doctor immediately. But we're selling them in vaporizers. That
Telling people to inhale it.
yeah. Well, the thing is that they're not approving it to be to
Right.
put it, but then also, oh, it's not on the cannabis regulations to look for it. So we did a study. We came up with 11 analytes in Michigan that are of interest. One of them is now going into regulation. MCT oil. MCT oil is just medium chain triglycerides. Is the same thing. Coconut oil. You
Yep.
can eat it. You shouldn't be inhaling it. There's FDA studies to say that.
It loves to coat your lungs and make it hard for your lungs to work.
I know, but then you should. Some of the other ones we're working on. Some other ones. A lot of stuff that I say I'm working on it. You know, the sad part is it's me funding it.
Right,
I
right. Oh
do it
yeah,
out
of
of
course.
passion and love.
Of course, yeah.
Like yeah, we spent a lot of time and a lot of energy on this stuff to do these studies because no one else. There's very few people doing it. And the states aren't really doing it. I wish they would, and I hope they do, and I applaud them if they do. But we got to start doing something because if we leave that out there, that 60% thing, I saw that made me cringe.
Yeah.
I'm like, just going to start diluting this stuff just to get the numbers down. That's what they have to do.
Yeah.
And is that safe to vaporize or inhale?
Right, right. It's and all in the name of protecting public safety. That's like the weird thing is like the limits are established to sort of protect public health and safety, and yet it then drives these decisions to have people consume things that you don't even really even understand what they're cut with, because it's not like these, my experience in GMP, you should have a master manufacturing record, a batch manufacturing record, which lists everything you fucking did for that whole that whole process, every ingredient used, all the quality specs for every ingredient, all of these things. It's all traceable. None of that exists for most of these producers. They're not actually being held to GMP standard. At least, I'm back up. Sometimes they're being held to food GMP standards. Those standards are very low compared to dietary supplement standards, which of course are not as strict as pharma, but the dietary supplement rules, 21 CFR 111, that at least requires the supplier evaluation, the ingredient verification, all of those sorts of things, the batch manufacturing records, and none of that exists. So there's no real clear way when you have a product to hold anyone accountable. Say like, show me what you put in this. There are
Well,
no
they should.
there are no records.
So there are great manufacturers. It's not as many as you'd hope that do these high standards, and it costs a lot more money to run those companies.
That's
And
right.
they're in the same fishbowl as people not doing them. And it's very hard to compete. And that's why I say that if you see a price point of a higher price point on some of these products, there could be a reason why. Look into
Yeah.
the companies and see if they're doing their due diligence, see if they're trying to create a safer product for everyone to consume.
Well, that's kind of this whole thing. It puts a lot of burden on both producers and consumers to do the auditing themselves, when regulations are not quite, doing the trick. Producers need to be auditing labs, ideally, if they care about getting accurate results and things like that. And consumers need to be putting pressure on producers and dispensaries, to get more transparency and higher quality product overall. But it's a struggle. But I know we've gone well over the hour here. But Josh, this has been a great conversation, and I feel like it might be in need of a follow-up too, because there are rabbit holes that we could chase down a lot of this stuff. But I really, really appreciate you being willing to take the hour plus here to kind of just lay out the situation, that we're dealing with. And I don't think there is a clear answer, at least not an easy one, that's going to just change tomorrow. And I think pressing these conversations is one of the best things that we can do. Like you said, for labs listening to this, talk about it, raise these issues, talk to your clients about these issues, talk to dispensaries, just talk. That trickles over to regulators. There's always like this 5-10 year lead in terms of, like you're saying, regulators sort of catching up on things going on. And so part of that is as a community, knowledge sharing, talking about what's going on, raising these issues, and making it impossible to ignore them. And I think that's one thing that's been the struggle up to this point, is it's been very easy to ignore these problems. And hopefully we're reaching that tipping point, especially with the amount of publicly available data that's coming out, with Yasha Khan's FOIA data that he's made publicly available that anyone can download. All of the work that you've done, other labs that have done off-shelf testing and shared their stuff. This is all coming together to tell the grand narrative. And you can't look away from it. The story tells itself after a while. And so hopefully this conversation has kind of done a little bit of part to kind of drive those conversations, and hopefully orient people to have more targeted conversations with their labs, with their producers, and all of that. So as we wrap up here, let everyone know, how do they learn more about the work that you're doing, about Infinite Cal, anything else that you want to share? I'll give you the floor here to close us out.
Yeah, I mean, to find more about us, you can always find us on our website, infinitecal.com. I mean, you search Infinite Cal or Josh Swider in Google, you'll probably find a lot of articles that come out. We publish in a lot of different publications, quoted in a lot of different things. I think you take a step back, and one thing that struck me is, like, you assume the regulators know what you know, and that was one of the worst assumptions that I've ever made in this industry.
Right.
Talk to all the people. Talk to the regulators and let them know what you know. And that, she's like, when you assume they just know it, they might not.
Right.
But as far as like continuing studies, we're always continuing things. I'm happy if anyone ever wants to contact me. You're more than welcome to email any of my emails from our websites, and I'll get back to you. I'll set up times to talk to people, to reach out. Anyone has any questions, we're more than willing to kind of make this industry go forward, or kind of give it help too. And we're here for a safer cannabis product in the future. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Josh. Well, thank